Good afternoon or good morning for now. Welcome to today's Live at the Waterhole show. It's myself, Kenneth Gamble. I'll be the guide for the session. We're starting off here at Lentor Lodge in the wonderful Great Rift Valley with some baboons and their posteriors. Always quite entertaining creatures to see. As always, the show is live and interactive. Please feel free to pop through your questions and comments. It's always quite fun to answer them and some of the discussions we delve into. Truly a magnificent view to start off the show with these two baboon bums. I must say baboons never cease to entertain us. It is quite nice to actually have them hanging around here a bit. It always feels like they are moving quite briefly through the Lentor camera when we switch over here. And it's also always entertaining to maybe, well, in this situation, seeing their antics up a bit closer. Here comes a large male into frame. You can just see how much larger he is. We're gonna pop over to main crossing. I see this female baboon is having a bit of a selfie moment, but yeah, we're gonna head over to the main crossing. We'll maybe come back here a bit later. Oh wow, we've got a lion right here at the crossing. Yep, it's gone back to being a flat cat, but we did at least catch a glimpse of it. Might be fortunate to see some action. Also notice the zebra in the top right hand corner. That being said, I don't think that lioness went prone to stalk. I think she's actually just lying down. But always a special treat to see some big cats on the Live at the Waterhole session. It's not something we often get spoiled with. Well, we're going to go back to Lentor. We'll pop over here if something happens while lioness gets a bit more mobile and see what the baboons are up to. Selfie action is definitely well underway. This baboon is also enjoying their moment of fame, having their face broadcast globally across the world. They are such inquisitive creatures. They look like a young male perhaps. Here comes the next one. Also needs to investigate and make sure the camera is functioning. And these are actually some local technicians that always keep the camera up to date. There is always a certain level of enjoyment one gets from observing baboons. It is always just unfortunate they can get a bit destructive at times, but once again I would largely put that down to human interference or their loss of maybe a bit of habituation or their loss of fear of man, that when they become problem animals, but they are very enjoyable and entertaining to watch. Almost looks like there's a bit of a yoga session going on here. Some interesting poses at play. Hi Shana, nice to have you on the show. It's been a while since I was last hosting a live at the waterhole session. I've been enjoying a bit of my winter vacation and exploring parts of southern Africa, but it's nice to be back home and back in the swing of routine. So I'm sure I'll be on a bit more in between a few other commitments, but it's quite enjoyable to see the differences over the past few weeks that have taken place across not only the southern African region but many of the other waterholes throughout Africa. It's quite amazing how quickly things can change in the blink of an eye. Jana, you'd like to know why, or Jana, why do they spend so much time grooming each other? I assume you're referencing the baboons. But yeah, for baboons, grooming, it's about a lot more than just keeping clean. Obviously, in the process, they remove ticks, dead skin, and debris, maybe some thorns or things like that. But it's more kind of, in a way, a bit of a social currency of the troop, essentially. So it strengthens friendships and alliances, maybe helps repair relationships after conflicts or fights, and also reduces stress in between the different members of the troop. So both the baboon being groomed and sometimes the one doing the grooming, they become quite relaxed. You can also see it quite often. They do seem very chilled and laid back. I can imagine it's quite nice. And yeah, who grooms whom can also tell you quite a bit about the relationships in the social hierarchy. Often you'll see the dominant male of the troop being groomed quite a bit, etc. And it's in that way that certain members of the troop will try and increase their favor or strengthen their relationships in those regards. But essentially, it's I would liken it to human politics in a way, or maybe a Game of Thrones type setup, but that's kind of how it goes. Ooh, that's quite pretty. We've got a superb starling running in. I am always obsessed with their coloration. And I mean, I do find our local South African or Southern African starlings quite pretty. But I must say the superb starling is well deserving of its name, and its coloration is very striking. I did at long last manage to find myself an East African bird book, a pocket-sized one, but can imagine it's not exactly an easy book to come across on one's travels in Southern Africa. A lot of the online stores I wanted to purchase from were out of stock, so I was quite happy to come across a copy. So hopefully my East African birding knowledge can only grow from here. It will probably also motivate me to go look for some birds in that part of the world. Sorry about that, everyone. There's just some camera issues. They're working on that in person. I think the baboons might have inadvertently damaged something. But we've just switched over to Old Dornio. Wonderful to be here and see the elephants gathering in their numbers. You can see the bush is much more sparse and dry now, so water is a very dear resource. Always wonderful to see the big elephants of Old Dornio congregating and whittling away the midday hours while they cool off a bit and quench their thirst. I must say everyone's looking quite relaxed and chilled. Not too much of a jostle going on. I think it would be safe to assume there's quite a stable social hierarchy amongst these bulls. So no one's really pushing their luck or challenging one another too much. It appears one or two of the bulls have decided it's time to get moving. I'm sure he's just going to go find a tree to rest in the shade of. I doubt he'll really set out on much of a feeding mission at this time of day. I'm sure it is quite warm over there. I was quite well reminded yesterday after travelling for about 2-3 weeks in the Western Cape or the Cape provinces, how warm the Kruger region is in winter. It was, I must say, it almost felt like summer yesterday, but it's quite nice to have year-round warm temperatures. I'm not so much a fan of the cold, and I'm sure these elephants can relate to that. Although I'm sure in the dead of winter, it probably gets a bit chilly in the mornings in the Old Dornio region. Milani, quite a nice question. You would like to know what are the most effective ways to keep elephants out of community crops without harming them. And that's entertaining. One of the elephant builders has dropped a few dung balls into the water source. That's not very nice of him. Anyway, I wouldn't say there's really one perfect solution. So, there's a few effective programs, and it relies on combining several methods. And I must say the strategy stretches across many things. It can be used in farming, the just integrated approach. But beehive fences can work because elephants tend to avoid bees or disturb the beehives. I've seen that in Kruger by hanging beehives from marula trees. They can stop elephants from damaging them or over-exploiting them. Of course, bees go to sleep at night, so they're probably not quite effective at nighttime. There's chili-based deterrents, so they make, I don't really want to call them smoke bombs, but they use the elephant dung, etc., and they mix it with a few things, especially chili oil and chilies, and that is then burnt, and that smoke is quite deterring towards elephants, and I think quite a few things for that matter. Strong fencing is always one of your, I'd say, cornerstones or foundation things. It's always going to be your first line of defense. Watchtowers, early warning systems, etc., whether it's some form of surveillance, I think that it paints the picture of the numerous things one needs to do. Of course, on a bigger scale, it's quite important that we protect wildlife corridors. If elephants can move safely and freely to other water sources or feeding areas, and that does deter them from wanting to feed on crops that are maybe nearby, and it prevents a lot of conflict before it even starts. But at the center of this, the key is really to work with local communities, because at the end of the day, they're the people carrying the real cost of living alongside elephants. And I think there's quite a few projects that have failed because that's been an oversight. But I do think in recent years, strong community engagement has led to much better success rates in projects like these. But yeah, quite an interesting topic and interesting research that is still ongoing and being done every day.
At Wild Earth, we believe every story has the power to create change. That's why we've launched the Wild Earth Impact Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to conservation and social impact. By showcasing conservation stories, we can change lives, protect nature, and empower communities. We have partnered with Empowers Africa to accept tax-deductible donations from US donors. Your donation will help fund critical programs that support our mission. Join us and be part of the change.
know that adverts pay our bills, but you don't necessarily like them. So, this is a fantastic way to stop being interrupted. Sign up today and you'll get instant access to wildlife. 24/7, ad-free, live and on demand. No pesky commercials, no rude interruptions, just wild Africa exactly as it unfolds. Wild Earth Explorers, wilder together.
Martin, you'd like to know, how does losing an old matriarch to poaching or natural causes impact the survival and behavior of the rest of the herd? So, losing an old matriarch can have a major impact, just because she carries decades of ecological and social knowledge. So she'll generally be able to remember reliable waterholes or where they are during droughts, which routes are safest, and how to respond to predators or unfamiliar threats. If she passes away, the herd doesn't simply collapse. Usually another experienced female will gradually take on the leadership role. There is obviously quite a cascade in different generations throughout an elephant herd, so I wouldn't say it's a huge void, but it is obviously a loss to the herd. But in the case with poaching, if several older females are suddenly lost, the herd then in that state would lose quite a huge amount of knowledge at once. And as far as I'm aware, there has been a few studies on it and has shown that disrupted elephant societies display quite drastic changes in decision-making, social behavior, and their response to threats, which might not always be the best responses, etc. Essentially an old matriarch is a bit more than just a leader. She's kind of a living library for the family, as are all the other related older females. It's kind of in a way, kind of a bit of a succession plan. So I would say passing from natural causes is not such a train smash, but obviously with the scourge of poaching, something like that can be quite catastrophic. Of course, it wouldn't be a very natural thing, if ever, for so many mature females in a herd to suddenly pass. I always love watching how relaxed and peaceful elephant bulls are at the waterholes. It's always very much a slow session for them. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Bit of a tussle there, and a reminder who's in charge of the access to the fresh water coming in there. I must say though that bull with the floppy ear, I think he's quite an older gentleman. So the younger bulls are a bit stronger and fitter, will probably push him around a bit. On in years. There we saw someone getting very stroppy, getting a bit upset with having to share his fresh water inlet with everyone, and just had to lay down the law a bit. It's quite interesting to see this behavior, how quickly it can change in the blink of an eye. It can go from very relaxed to quite aggressive and possessive when it comes to water. Of course, quite thrilling to witness it. but just a reminder of the power of elephants. Kato, you'd like to know if elephants ever get caught in snares. So yeah, sadly they do. They often get caught in wire snares, although these snares are generally originally set for small animals like antelopes, and then elephants unfortunately step into one of them, or it catches them around the trunk, and as the animal struggles, the wire starts to cut deeply into their skin. So it is something you come across, and I mean, just in the Kruger itself, you not regularly, but it does pop up more often than you'd think. And then generally vets are called in situations like that, to dart and remove the snare and try help the animal. And the problem is, because elephants are incredibly strong, they often break free and then carry the snare with them, whereas another animal would be stationary and die on the spot. So yeah, it's quite sad. I've seen a couple elephants also with parts of their trunks missing, and inadvertently that generally has something to do with the snare. But yeah, it unfortunately leaves bad wounds, infections, and permanent damage. Sometimes an entire part of a trunk is just severed. And yeah, sadly calves are particularly vulnerable just because of their smaller size. But yeah, that being said, I've been on a couple snare sweeps, and I've come across snares set for giraffes and hippos. So I think elephants are just too strong for snares, but it is quite scary that poachers are, I don't know what the word is, blatantly trying to poach larger and larger animals. It's no longer necessarily about subsistence for food, etc. It's part of bushmeat trades, etc., ivory poaching, and obviously a very cruel method of poaching. That was the other thing I wanted to mention about snares, though, is how indiscriminate they are and how often they will catch anything and everything. And often the problem is poachers don't regularly check their snares or pick them all up, so things are often left in the bush for years and before they kill something. Or so yeah, quite a horrible invention, to be honest. But there is a lot of work being done, a lot of conservation groups to deal with snares. Unfortunately, it's just a very labor-intensive job. It requires a lot of hard work and man hours. But yeah, snares will always be a scourge in the African bush. seems like there's a bit of peace restored here at the waterhole. Also see two of the bulls are sizing each other up, slightly roughhousing. But yeah, when you see how they sometimes defecate or urinate very close to the water, you can kind of understand why they're quite possessive of the fresh water that's entering into the waterhole. I also got a bit distracted, but I do see we have a very patient giraffe waiting in the background. Don't know if he's truly going to get a chance anytime soon, but he'll just have to wait a bit. I'm sure the eddies will eventually make a bit of space or move off, but I don't think he wants a chance getting too close, especially if you can see how quickly the demeanor of the elephants is capable of changing. So I think he's going to play it safe. Now we have some zebras popping by. I'm sure those are the first of many, and they are probably more hanging just outside of view. But it's certainly that typical dry season scene with all the giraffes, elephants, and zebras here at El Doño. Hustle and bustle of the waterhole. One thing I do find was quite interesting about the elephant bulls when they're at El Doño, they don't really partake in mud bathing or splashing themselves too much. Obviously there is a bit of splashing, etc., but largely they just focus on drinking. It's not really much of a pool party. I guess there's the odd splash here and there, but very much different behavior compared to the likes of the Tembe waterhole, for example, or even what we see in Kruger. And the elephants really do get stuck in. I want to say it maybe has something to do with the shallowness, but at the same time That's generally the best spot to go. We often see them really stirring the water up in timber and the little mud puddles, etc. So yeah, quite interesting. At the same time, they might also splash themselves occasionally. This is quite warm that it evaporates quite rapidly under the sunshine. Jive Bunny, you're mentioning how strange it is, oh, still knowing we won't see 1 ton. Yeah, I was quite sad to learn of that while I was away on holiday. I saw it pop through on social media. Yeah, it shows you how abrupt things can change, but still very sad to know he won't be popping up, or we won't be looking forward to any of his visits anymore. Fortunately, we do have good memories and many sightings that we were all spoiled to when he used to grace us with his presence. I think another thing that's at least heartening is that he passed away from natural causes and wasn't due to poaching or someone's greed. And I'm sure he lived a long and plentiful life and passed on his, I don't know if I'd say superior genes, but his exquisite genes. I've read a couple interesting things about younger elephants with shorter, stronger, straighter ivory actually tend to outcompete bulls with larger ivory in fights. So it's quite interesting to see that change. But nonetheless, 1 ton really was a magnificent tusker. Maybe in a few years' time we'll see some of his offspring gracing us in front of the cameras here. Slowly but surely everyone's filling up their water tanks. I see the bull that is still dominating the inlet has not given up his hold. But I'm sure the elephants will move on. We're just going to head over to Lentor for a bit. There's some pretty birds waiting for us, and we'll probably come back here a bit later. My absolute favorite, birds that are to be seen. I'm sure there's a few seed eaters that are going to shortly grace us with their presence. Can definitely hear lots of chatter, and they will probably be seeking a bit of refuge in the thorn branches to the right there. They do often tend to quickly dive back into cover. They always feel very exposed at the water's edge. I think it was just our luck that we maybe missed them, but they will come back very quickly, I'm sure. But that is one of the actual secrets of making a A decent bird bath at your house is to provide the birds with a bit of cover or something that they can quickly fly back into if they're disturbed. Putting a bird bath in the open makes them feel a bit unsafe and does expose them to small raptors or hawks, etc. I know a few people have also taken it a step further and made quite pretty reflection ponds or bird baths. It really allows for excellent photography. I think this is the typical lesson of birding, where it requires a bit of patience and the birds all disappear. I'm sure they'll show up soon, I hope. Just trying to pick up any form of movement in those branches. There we go. There's a few seed eaters coming in now. Something probably spooked them just as we switched. They look like 5 inches from what I can tell. Also probably a weaver or two. Obviously our zooming is very carefully zooming in for us. Can't rush it. Oh, there's some 5 inches. That was I know it's not necessarily a blue wax ball. We call them blue wax balls. I think up in Kenya they're referred to as cordon bleus. And I know there is a few differences with the ones found in East Africa. I should not have left my small East African bird book in the car though. I will remember it for next time. But especially those small little seed eaters like the 5 inches and the wax bills, they are very, very skittish when it comes to going down to water. They know they need to be very careful, and there's plenty of things that wish to eat them or ambush them. What's quite interesting, sometimes they'll almost form a conveyor belt. You generally see it with the quilias, where a few flock down and then the rest fly back, and it's almost just like a rotating conveyor belt the whole time of movement. Obviously something like that is quite disorienting for a predator. You haven't got one specific target to focus on, and they're constantly moving the whole time. So yeah, quite interesting how adaptive or clever birds can be. Alright, I think our birds have given us a bit of a slip on there, but camera shy. But we're going to go over to Tembe for a bit. Well, quite a drastic change in the foliage or the flora here at Tembe. I know the trees have still got a fair amount of greenery on them, but yeah, quite a stark change. Of course, we are in the middle of the winter season or the dry season in southern Africa, so it's not unusual to see it like this, but it is just interesting to see how quickly it can change. I don't think I've seen the cams in about 2 or 3 weeks since I've been traveling, so yeah, quite a stark contrast. We have Ellie and a few impalas mingling about. Always love the Tembe cam, it's so pretty. Oh, there's some Egyptian goose also floating by on this fine Sunday. Podmeter, you'd like to know, how do birds survive the intense heat during the middle of the day? So they've got quite a few clever ways of dealing with the extreme midday heat. I think the simplest way is many just become a lot less active. They move off into the shade and hold their wings slightly away from their bodies just to let that body heat or heat from their body just escape a bit. But yeah, that's generally why if you're a bird watcher, you do it in the morning or the late afternoon hours. The middle of the day is a bit dead. And keeping in mind, birds don't have sweat glands, so a lot of them cool themselves through evaporative cooling. So some pant, we see them with their bills open and panting. Some species use that gular fluttering, so you see that quite a bit with cormorants. I'm trying to think, cormorants generally do it the most. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I'm sure there's plenty of examples, it's just the one that comes to mind. But what that is just the vibration of the moist tissues in the throat that helps also lose heat without using as much energy as necessarily heavy panting would. And then I think in very specialized conditions like in the desert, etc., there are some birds that have specialized blood flow adaptations to manage heat. But another thing you would often see, and that's why it's always such a treat in hot environments, if you just simply have a little bird bath. Birds really make use of that quite a bit, and I think you'd be amazed to see how much bird life you can attract merely just with a simple bird bath, as opposed to putting bird food and bird feeders out. Water is much more important to birds. I know quite often it's heavily recommended during heat waves just to help birds cope with it, and not just birds, also the nature or animals living in your garden. But yeah, in the middle of heat waves or droughts, a bit of water, goes quite a long way to helping birds get through it. Of course, if you're also into your bird photography, it's a very great way to photograph a number of birds that are actually quite hard to see. And these impala are looking quite...
Hi, I'm Cedric Dold, Wild Earth presenter and private guide. I'd love you to join me on safari. In September, I'll be at Valgevonden for a beautiful spring safari. And in November, I'll be tracking Wild Earth's famous leopards here in the Sabi Sands. Come and share the wildlife, the stories, and the adventure with me. Book now and let's go on safari.
The Wild Earth Impact Foundation is a non-profit that uses the power of wildlife storytelling as a force for good. We create sustainable development projects that showcase conservation stories, empower people, and inspire environmental action. As a registered South African PBO, you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Wild Earth Impact Foundation. To find out more, visit our website.
Would you like to know what an elephant's favorite food is? You could ask me questions like that in real time. Our safaris are live and interactive from the heart of Africa. The Fortunas over here. Watch Safari Live and connect with nature. Wild Earth Explorers, wilder together. We know that adverts pay our bills, but you don't necessarily like them. So, this is a fantastic way to stop being interrupted. Sign up today and you'll get instant access to wildlife. 24/7, ad-free, live and on demand. No pesky commercials, no rude interruptions, just wild Africa exactly as it unfolds. Wild Earth Explorers, wilder together.
Well, things are looking quite quiet and peaceful here at Tembe. We're going to go to Ulusaba for a bit and see what's going on there. Oh, that's quite nice to see. 2 elephants having quite an extensive pool party in this large body of water. It's always quite entertaining to see when they really get stuck in and have a good bath like this. Obviously you need the right water body, but yeah. I would say that the lapwing's probably not too happy about having the elephants on its patch of shore. Don't think they have chicks at this time of year, but yeah, it's always a possibility. I see a few of the cormorants are also trying to get out of the elephant's way. That was quite funny. The one jumped off and gave the one elephant quite a fright there as it jumped off in front of it. Not sure why it jumped off. It was quite safe in the tree there, but that was entertaining. That elephant did hesitate for a second. Also got a grey heron. Oh, sorry, that's a hammerkorp. There was a cormorant that jumped in, but there is a hammerkorp and a grey heron. Here's a very good pool party going on here. I don't think these fellows will be too hot afterwards. I think they'll be quite nicely cooled down. But yeah, it's quite interesting to see how large bodies of water can influence how animals react. And obviously it changes the habitat quite drastically, and you see things you wouldn't normally see. Of course, a lot of the large bodies of water in the Kruger regional zone are man-made, so it does change a few things, whereas normally most of the water bodies would be restricted to pans or marshes. That would be much more normal to see in the Kruger region, or rivers. But yeah. Chrissy, you'd like to know if elephants always use their trunks as snorkels in deep water, or do they hold their breath? So, of course, they can do both. Elephants are very good swimmers, and they do hold their breath when they dive briefly, excuse me, as we see with these two roughhousing in the water here. But when they're swimming at the surface in water deep enough to cover their heads, that's when you will often see them lifting the tip of their trunk above the water and use it as a snorkel, because you can imagine it's quite difficult for them to raise their head up if they're not in the position to, or if they're in water where they can't stand and they're busy treading water. It's much easier to lift your trunk up and use it as a snorkel. So yeah, that allows the rest of their body and their head to remain submerged while they continue breathing, and yeah, that trunk is what gives them a huge advantage when it comes to crossing deep rivers or water. I've seen it once in Botswana with a herd crossing the Chobe River. All you see is a little trunk sticking out as they swim across, whereas you can imagine it's obviously just much easier to swim like that than it is to keep that massive head above the water. It would be a much more strenuous activity. But yeah, it is very cool. I don't know, having a built-in snorkel seems like a very cool adaptation in my opinion. sorry about that, we just quickly switched over. Unfortunately, it looks like the camera gave us some problems there. But you have to move quick when those small birds are there. Anyway, we've come back over to Aldonio. Maybe later we can go back to Lentor for some birding action. It seems like Mother Nature insists that we be a bit more patient. Gigi, you'd like to know if elephants ever have to worry about crocodiles or territorial hippos when they enter a waterhole. So obviously an adult elephant, especially a bull elephant for that matter, they have very little to fear from crocodiles at a waterhole. They're just simply too large. Although a small calf, of course, is par for the course if a large crocodile grabbed it. But you often see that with females. They'll usually keep youngsters well protected or surrounded as they wade into the water body to start drinking. And I mean, there are quite a few videos out there of a crocodile leaping out and grabbing an elephant by its trunk. I think this is more reactive behavior than anything really meaningful. It might hope it's maybe a young elephant, but yeah, almost every time a crocodile does do that, it normally ends badly for the crocodile. Elephant gets a large fright and drags the crocodile with it, or actually tusks and attacks the crocodile. I think there's been a few crocodiles killed like that. On the hippo side of things, I think it's a bit of a different story. Obviously they can be quite territorial on water, but even a hippo then will generally give a herd of elephants space, especially some bulls, etc. I think sometimes there can be tense encounters, specifically in confined water where it's a bit tight, etc., or the hippos don't have anywhere to go and maybe he's a bit grumpy. Also, if the hippo's got space to swim away or dive away, they will. I have seen an interesting interaction once. It was somewhere in the Kruger, where one hippo was a bit cheeky with an elephant, but it had quite a bit of space to hide in. I do think there was a hippo calf involved in it, hence the aggression towards the younger elephant bull. But yeah, we often see it on the cams. At Rosie's, for example, that poor hippo generally gets chased out of the water. So yeah, elephants at the end of the day don't really have much to worry about and are normally the bullies of the waterhole, to be honest. I have a feeling the giraffes and zebras are going to have to wait a bit longer. There's more elephants now moving in. I see someone just got poked with a tusk in the rear, so possession for the fresh water is still well underway. I see that bull on the left looks like he splashed himself a bit, so it's not always the golden rule, but they definitely can't have wonderful pool parties like the other elephants were. In keeping with the trend of elephant pool parties, we've hopped over to Rosie's. You can see everyone's getting stuck in here. Also just quite a stark contrast because, okay, Rosie's is a bit deeper than what Albania is, considering a hippo can lie in here. But these elephants are also splashing themselves quite a bit more. I'm convinced there is a bit of a, in my opinion, a difference in the albino elephants and the ones in the Kruger region. Yeah. Elephants in the Kruger region seem to like splashing themselves a bit more. Tina, you were asking if the herd has a designated lifeguard or lookout while the others are submerged and playing. I wouldn't say really so much that in the strict sense. I do think elephants do show collective vigilance. So while some members are maybe drinking or bathing, etc., there might be one or two that are remaining a bit more alert or keeping an eye on the surroundings. Of course, the matriarch and other experienced females are especially important for assessing potential danger. So while calves are usually kept nearby or within protective zones of the family, the individual maybe keeping watch often changes, rather than it just being one elephant with a permanent job or a pre-assigned job. Again, at the same time, like I was saying, I don't think there's necessarily much fear that they feel. They are incredibly alert animals, so their hearing and sense of smell, etc., and their sight is very attuned. So it's not often that they really bumble into danger, and if they do, yeah, it tends to, once again, it's that whole collective vigilance or defensive behavior that takes place. You can hear quite a bit of bird activity in the background here at Rosie's. So there's also plenty of seed eaters operating out of a bush to get their drink of water. It seems like these elephants are on their way out. They've had their bit of fun and their thirst has been quenched. And there's some impala in the background as well. Alright, all the action has disappeared here. We're going to head on over to Tortillas and see what's waiting for us there. Ooh, that's quite pretty. Nice kingfisher there. And there it goes. Hopefully it comes back. They generally return to the general roosting spot or their perching spot while they're hunting like that. So fingers crossed he comes back. It was very pretty. I love their coloration. Looked a bit like a grey-headed kingfisher to me, but once again I'm kicking myself for not keeping that bird book of mine close by. Alright, our kingfisher has definitely given us the slip there. We're going to head over to Lentor and see what's going on there. There we go, bit of success at last. This was the birding bonanza I had in mind. A lot of interesting birds coming in there. There was a white-browed sparrow weaver. I think there's a cutthroat finch. Obviously a few of the duller colored birds, it's obviously females. It's always a bit more challenging to identify them in winter. We've got grey-headed sparrows. There is some female weavers mingling about. I'm also suspicious those ones with the chestnut chest are female weavers of a sort. I'm just not familiar with them. But lots of action. Kind of also that conveyor belt effect I was talking about earlier. As a few go in, have a few sips, and then hop back into the thorns, and then the next ones come through. So keeps them a bit safer. I think they also feel a bit more comfortable.
Can you hear that sound? The way it grows, the way it calls you to come alive. Can you feel the rhythm? The way it beats with the land? Do you feel alive again? Or maybe you never left. You don't just visit the wild, you return to it. Alright then, let me show you what you're missing. Our archive allows you to delve into the past, be it yesterday or many years ago. You can visit characters who've left us.
Doesn't ever get old.
This is, of course, the Little Prince, Hosanna, guides who've moved on to other things.
Tingana's walking right in front of my vehicle.
These guys are the sausage tree pride.
Classic stories and wonderful moments. Wild Earth Explorers, wilder together. On Drive with me today, I have a new presenter. This is Ridley. Say hello, Ridley.
Well, the last time we checked, I had counted about 10 crocs. I'm not going to end the safari without visiting the Mara River.
We know that adverts pay our bills, but you don't necessarily like them. So, this is a fantastic way to stop being interrupted. Sign up today and you'll get instant access to wildlife. 24/7, ad-free, live and on demand. No pesky commercials, no rude interruptions, just wild Africa exactly as it unfolds. Wild Earth Explorers, wilder together.
A few interesting doves coming in there. They generally sit still for a bit longer compared to your seed eaters, so we might get lucky. It seems like a lot of the seed eaters have now moved to the back section of the waterhole here. Mainly weavers from what I can see. Oh, it's where the water's flowing out, so probably a bit easier for them. Oh, there's quite a party taking place at the back now. A lot of birds jumping in. It's quite funny. I've also seen it a few times nearby us, and if there's a bit of an outflow, The birds often flock in for that shallow flowing water. I don't know if it's maybe they feel more comfortable in water they can stand in, it's not too deep. Obviously things like crocodiles etc. are a very real risk or instinctual thing for them to avoid. But they certainly seem quite a bit happier with shallower water there. I think it's also the same with a bird bath. It's also shallow enough for them to sit in, so that's why they generally feel a bit safer. But yeah, still very jumpy. Something did spook in there. Suppose you were saying you think you heard a hornbill and you wonder how common they are at Lentor. You do think we see yellow-billed hornbills here. I think I do recall in the larger tree here, I think the hornbills tend to hide a bit more up in that large acacia tree. It's quite interesting. It's not often that you actually see hornbills coming down for water, etc. I also think back on it, I very scarcely, if ever, really see hornbills come down to my bird bath. They'll often come past or be curious, but I guess they derive a lot more moisture from their diet. Alright, the birds have spread out a bit. We're going to head over to Tembe again to see what's going on there. There we go, we have an elephant that's not fleeting or running away back into the sand forest. A bit more of a closer view. You can see a lot of, almost all the, I think all the mud holes have actually dried up in this section. So now it's back to sand blasting or sand baths for the elephants. Works just as well, we're quite happy to do that. I do think mud probably works a bit better, but dust bathing is quite normal for quite a few animals. We see a number of them doing it. I do think personally I would rather be covered in mud than dust. I think I may have jinxed it, but our elephant left rather rapidly now. At least we have the good old Nyala still, and a few impalas hanging around. It does look rather idyllic though. You can see the impalas are hugging the shade quite heavily. They do not want to be exposed to the harsh sun rays at the moment. It was quite a pretty bird call coming up there. I think it was a boo-boo. I don't think it's a gorgeous bushshrike. Really echoing quite a bit throughout the waterhole here, probably in a thicket nearby. Also one of those birds that are very easy to hear, quite hard to see. Aha, we have a sneaky hammockhawk moving throughout the reeds there. It's quite cool, you can see that behavior as he, every step he takes, he shifts his foot around a little bit, tries to disturb the water underneath there, try to flush out any fish or frogs. I think specifically he's probably looking for frogs in the situation. But yeah, very cool to see him moving around there, trying to flush out some lunch. They are very effective hunters. I think many a lodge in the bush has tried to keep fish in a pond and only to be outwitted by a hammockhawk feeding on the majority of the fish. Junior, so you'd like to know, how does the murky algae not affect the bird life? So in this case, what appears to be murky green algae on the surface is, in this case, it's actually duckweed or other tiny floating aquatic plants. I know there are other ones like water lettuce. Obviously, it's quite hard to see at this distance, but twofold. I've physically been to Tembe in a lot of the waterholes. But yeah, so this is duckweed or other floating vegetation that makes this green mat across there. Can actually be quite beneficial rather than harmful. Ducks and other water birds feed directly on these plants. Vegetation also provides a habitat for insects and other small aquatic creatures. They'll have quite extensive root systems underneath the soil, underneath the water surface. So yeah, it often provides cover for tiny fish and invertebrates. If it does become extremely dense, in the situation where it is quite extremely dense, it can eventually reduce light and oxygen levels in the water. So too much can cause problems. There's always a balance. Just also noting, a lot of these aquatic vegetation or floating aquatic vegetation we see in southern Africa is I wouldn't know, invasive. Some of it is considered heavily invasive, but yeah, it is exotic. It's not actually local or normal, but some of it does become naturalized, and in the grand scheme of things, it is not an issue, but obviously it can lead to issues. But it plays a role. There's nutrient cycling taking place, oxygen cycling. So yeah, it's just about balancing the two, that it doesn't get out of hand. But if it was green algae, as you said, that would be quite a different situation. That algae feeds on water in the water, and then eventually there's no oxygen, and then yeah, that's when you start to get very toxic, stagnant water systems where it's not full of much life. You can see this in Nyalas being a bit territorial. And that is a territorial display of theirs when they horn the ground or scrape their horns. I often see kudus also do it, but also just a display of strength, etc. can see a small plover there, just behind the yard. Oh no, there's still one there. It's probably a three-banded plover. Bit hard to see from this distance, but just the size alone, and it's generally the only real inland plover you get in these habitats. But this one, Inyala bull, is really showing off quite a bit for us here. Trying to impress the ladies. I must say it does give their appearance quite a bit of character when their horns are caked in mud, etc. They do look quite impressive. The males are very beautiful. Yeah, there we go. That is indeed the three-banded plover. Quite a cute little bird. They have a lot of spunk. Their call echoes quite a bit throughout many aquatic habitats, and they will often chase off other birds that they feel are intruding on their territory, but they are very cute and pretty. Can't 100% see their markings now, but they have got rather striking markings and quite a striking eye with a red eye ring around it. Made in Chelsea with quite an interesting question. You'd like to know what is the most misunderstood aspect of conservation that well-meaning tourists often get wrong. Just to start off with, obviously this is my opinion of the situation, but I'm sure it's echoed by a few people. But I think an aspect that's often quite misunderstood of conservation is the idea that conservation means protecting every individual every individual animal from harm, pardon me, and it doesn't. Conservation is the greater scheme of things. It's primarily about protecting healthy population, habitats, functioning ecosystems. So it's always about the bigger picture. And unfortunately, this often means allowing natural processes that can be difficult for us as humans to watch, whether it be predation, competition, disease, drought, and sometimes even the death of an animal that we maybe are attached to or have become very used to seeing. So yeah, just allowing those processes to come and go as nature intended. Yeah, I think a lot of people, you often see it on social media on certain game reserves where people see an injured animal and they want everyone to rush to help the animal out. And like I've said many times on the show previously, at the end of the day it comes down to, unless it wasn't human impact, then it's no place for us to interfere. Of course, in certain very rare circumstances, if it's a very endangered animal or a rare animal, or there's very few on the reserve, management will weigh in on what they should do. I think another misconception is that conservation only happens inside protected areas. People living alongside wildlife are absolutely critical and central to the future of the conservation of wildlife. If conservation doesn't consider their safety and livelihoods, it's very hard to make it sustainable. I think we did touch on it with regards to the elephants and how one prevents those human-animal conflicts. But yeah, if the people on the ground aren't being included, it's not a very sustainable model. And I think that's also something that's come to the surface over time, is it's not about, conservation is about freezing nature in a perfect moment. It's about giving these natural systems enough space and resilience to keep functioning. So we try build corridors, try enlarge these areas to give animals more space. The bigger the system, the more it can regulate itself without our interference. Sister C, you are asking if I've ever had a moment where you realized you completely misread an animal's intent or body language. Yeah, I think it happens to all of us. I think it can be deceiving. I do think of myself sometimes as quite a cautious or scaredy cat person when it comes to dealing with large and dangerous animals. I don't like to interrupt them or interfere with them or impose on them. But yeah, I think it generally happens. I would say, yeah, it's your larger dangerous animals where it takes place, like elephants or the big cats or rhinos or hippos, etc. I think one gets better over the years. The more you get used to it or experienced, you learn to approach quite carefully, slowly, try and make an informed decision while looking at all the behavior and the clues that are present before further approaching the animal. But touch wood, I've never had anything very bad or dangerous happen, just a bit of a fright here and there, or had to move out of the way quickly for an elephant. Sometimes once or twice for a rhino that looked a lot more friendly or peaceful than I thought it was. But yeah, almost all times it's ended well, and I think that just goes back to being responsible and careful and not trying to make too much of an assumption. I think a lot of the bad elephant interactions we see of or hear of in the news or on social media, I think 80 to 90% of those situations are generally elephant bulls and must. And the reason everyone warns you about elephant bulls and must is, aside from the heightened aggression, is actually just because they become so unpredictable. They can go from being very calm and giving off body language or signs of being calm to all of a sudden very aggressive. And of course, if you're not expecting it, it's quite hard if you're close to that animal, etc. Rhinos can be funny. They can appear to be very friendly, and then all of a sudden a bull can get a bit boisterous. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, just it probably doesn't happen very often if one takes the right mitigation factors, or just ethically and responsibly observes the animals. Don't get too much into their space. I think that's also where it gets unpredictable, is when people approach far too closely. I think maybe that's something that needs to be kept in mind, is not overstepping the boundaries and making sure the animal is comfortable. See it sometimes a couple times when the way people stop, they stop in an elephant's path as somewhere where it wants to cross or go, and then obviously that causes a bit of a different reaction. It's better to just give them their space and allow them to carry on, or if they wish to approach the vehicle, it's them and their terms.
Explorers get exclusive extras like extended safaris, private live drives, fireside chats, and the Jackie's Waterhole Camp. Your membership also unlocks early access to travel opportunities, competitions, merchandise, and prizes. So sign up today and you could even win a luxury safari travel prize. Not bad, right?
I think basically he wants the hyena away from him.
This is unusual habitat for cheetah to hunt in. Here we go, some more elephants are coming. It's an elephant party.
We know that adverts pay our bills, but you don't necessarily like them. So, this is a fantastic way to stop being interrupted. Sign up today and you'll get instant access to wildlife. 24/7, ad-free, live and on demand. No pesky commercials, no rude interruptions, just wild Africa exactly as it unfolds. Wild Earth Explorers, wilder together.
That certainly will be a few tough summers ahead and winters. Bean, I really like your comment or question, but you were saying if you could make every guest put down their cameras and focus on one small overlooked aspect of the bush, what would it be? I think for me it would be to sit back for a minute and put down the cameras or the phones or whatever and just watch everything interacting and functioning together. Maybe watch how the impalas are behaving between each other, how maybe the birds or the oxpeckers are cleaning the animals, how the different birds are interacting with each other. I think that's like always the most fascinating thing I find, is just to stop for a second and watch everything interacting and working. And not merely staring at just one organism, but watching it go about its daily business and what it's doing and how it's interacting. I think that's something we often miss. And often in situations like that, all of a sudden you maybe notice a little spider, a beetle, a cricket or grasshopper, but just something different. And it does remind you these conservation areas are not just about large mammals, but a whole plethora of species that are functioning. I think for me personally, I never really paid attention to trees and plants, and because of bird watching I started to take notice of the different trees with their flowers and their fruits, etc. And it kind of opened up a whole other avenue where you start to take notice of where certain trees grow, and maybe some pretty specimens, but and it's just by maybe moving a bit slower and just watching the world function. I think it's easier for me though, because I am a terrible photographer. I wish I was a better photographer. I think my patience is probably lacking, but I do dabble slightly in photography, but I'm by no means very good. Also 90% of the time I'm staring through the binoculars watching birds, so it's tough to compete. Bit of interesting behavior here. I got excited, but it's just the impala rutting. quite a guttural sound. The first time I heard it as a child, I was convinced the pride of lions had teared out of the bush and were attacking an antelope. Often, it's amazing to think such a beautiful antelope can sound so scary, but yeah, very entertaining. Would have thought the rutting was almost over. They might rut for a bit longer, I guess. It's probably starting to near the end of the rutting season. It didn't appear like that was too much of a serious display there. Just a bit of chasing and reminding who's in charge, or who's the boss of the spot. But I don't think there was many females really around there, but I do think the rut is relatively coming to an end, so there's not much the male impalas are really trying to prove now. If anything, their condition will be quite weak, as they would have quite heavily focused on mating and fighting and all the fun things that go with the rut, so they are probably looking at stocking up a bit on eating and improving their condition. They do lose quite a bit of condition during the winter months, aside from the conditions, but also just their obsession or intense focus that they enter when they start rutting. You can see the Sinyala's chosen quite a secluded spot to drink water from. Of course, he's on his own, so you can see he appears to be very alert. He's not taking any chances. Still waiting for the day I get to see a lion on the Tembe camp specifically. I have seen them there in person, but would like to see one stroll past the camera on a Sunday for us. It's actually quite exciting. I did forget we did see a lion today, so albeit a very brief sighting, and I think that lion went very flat after that. That is unfortunately the problem with lion sightings in the day. They don't necessarily do much, and they tend to lie very flat, so you don't see much of them either. But nonetheless, it was still very cool. My pleasure, Penelope. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I had also quite a nice session today. I know the birds were maybe not as forthcoming as they could have been, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. But yeah, we did see a couple cool things. Lion was definitely a highlight. I see our impala starting a bit of a fight there, or sizing each other up ever so slightly. But just again, my thanks to everyone who enjoyed the show today, and thank you for joining. It was quite an interesting one. It's good to be back. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their week and has a productive one. Enjoy this afternoon's sunset drive. I hope there's a few good sightings on it. But yeah, from my side, thanks again, and we'll just watch out the last few moments here.